Hello, how's everyone doing today? This is Varun Rao coming with you with the second website creation session. And essentially today we will be creating a navigation bar, a footer, and a profile picture. So this is the navigation bar. As you can see, this block is known as the navigation bar. This bottom is known as a footer, and this is a profile picture. Within the profile picture, we would like to include a functionality where when I hover over it, we will darken the image and we will show some text. But unlike last time, we will also displace this text by a few pixels. We will move this up by a few pixels. So let's get ready and let's just start coding. So as you can see, I have my screen here, and I will start writing the HTML code. So the first thing that we will be including is the not.type HTML. So in this not.type HTML, this essentially just states that this is actually an HTML file. And within this, we will have an HTML tag. You can see. And then we will have a head tag. The head tag lets us tell, or lets the browser know that we have some links in here, or JavaScript files, and we can include a few links. Same thing as last time. Let me see if I can zoom out. Okay. Sheet policy can zoom in. So, and we will have an href index.css. So as you can see, I have an index2.css file, and this is a type of CSS. So this is always the syntax, or always the same code when you have to include any CSS. So now the next thing we will do is we will create the navigation bar. So the navigation bar is simply a simple open and nav tag. And within this nav tag, we have something called spans. So spans are known as inline block elements. What inline block elements are elements that exist all on the same line. So I'm going to write here, this is known as inline block elements. Inline elements. So these are inline elements, not inline block elements. I'm sorry. So what inline elements do is that they allow different content to exist on the same line. And these are unlike divs. So span is an inline element. And div is a block element. So I will include a few more spans here, and you. Here I can write homepage. Here I can write about us. And here I can write contact us. So as you can see, they should all exist on the same exact line. So let's see how this looks. I open this from some kind of a browser. Okay. Let's go ahead and open this from a browser. As you can see, the homepage, the about us, and the contact us links or text, they all exist on the same line. So now I want to show you the difference between span and div. Like I said, span is an inline element, and div is a block element. So what I just opened up is known as Chrome Developer Tools. This allows me to change content on any single website simply using the browser. You can open it if you're running on Chrome, but if you aren't, it's fine. This is not necessary for you to learn, but it is very helpful. Chrome only offers this tool. So I can actually change the span tag to a div tag. And if I do, you guys will notice This div now takes 100% of the page. This span, however, stays in the same line as this other span. So these two spans both exist on the same line, but this div exists on its own line. So that's the difference between a span and a div. Span takes up the content provided in it, so we'll only take up the length of home page, and div will take up the length of the entire screen and will not allow any other elements to exist on that same line unless provided by the CSS. So now the next thing I would like to do is I would like to create the image or the profile picture. So let's go ahead and switch over screens to that. All right, so now I will have a div for that, and we will give this div an ID of picture. Again, this is the same thing as last lecture in the sense that if I hover over the image, it will darken and it will show some text. But now we will display the text or displace the text so that the text will actually move upwards and will make space for the bottom text. So we have three sections. The first is the image. I have named this profile.jpg, and you guys name it whatever necessary, but you guys should have downloaded a JPEG or PNG file, some sort of file, as an image, so now you can include it. Next thing we will include is description tag. In this description tag, we'll have my website. Okay, that's the top text, and the bottom text is thanks for coming. So what exactly is the difference between the top text, which is this, and the bottom text, which is this? The difference is that in the top text, you will see that text once the page loads. The bottom text will only be seen when we hover over the image. So that's what the functionality we would like to bring to this website tutorial session, or specifically the profile picture. This functionality is much cooler than the last week's functionality, because now when we display the thanks for coming text, when we hover over the image, we will also move this div up maybe 10-15 pixels, and it'll look very clean. So now let me go ahead and show you guys how it should look, and hopefully you guys should get a pretty good idea of what I'm talking about. So as you can see here, if I hover over this image, this div actually moves up by a few pixels. So if I want to actually show you through this tool, you will see here's the text, and here is the description. Even though you don't actually see the text, it's still located here, right? And now when I hover over it, you will see the text in that exact location, and then we will see that image move up by maybe 10-15 pixels, however much you want to move it up by. It's up to you. All right, so now let's code that. All right. So what I'd like to do is include the footer tag, which I think I've actually showed you guys how to code it before I showed you guys exactly what it looks like. But now we can move on to this footer tag. So in this footer tag, we have a div. And within it, we will have items like blog item 1, blog item 2, and blog item 3. And I will copy and paste to make this very simple. And we will have another div, separate content from one another, that will say event 1, event 2, event 3. So, the same thing, let's change the text. Event 1, event 2. Okay. And lastly, we'll have another div. Donate and email us. These are just dummy links, so they don't actually link to anything. Just to show how it would look if this was actually a link. Okay, so now let's figure out how this looks through our browser without including any CSS. As you can see here, I have the home page, about us, and contact us page, which are all located on the top, and they are essentially all on the same line. So this span and this span and this span are all inline elements, which allow it to be on the same exact spot. Then we have this image, or this div, which is picture, and we have something that says text, thank you for coming, and we have a description which says my website. But this text and this description are not on the image itself. So this is all done in the CSS. I just want you guys to get an understanding of how this would look without any CSS. And lastly, this footer, as you can see, I have separate content for blog item 1, blog item 2, blog item 3, and each div takes 100% width. But as you can see here, blog item 1, blog item 2, and blog item 3, and these events are all located on the same exact div. So how is this possible? Look, you see this div, and this div are all located on the same line. But this div, and this div are all located on different lines. This is because divs are all block elements. But within the CSS, I can change this property of the div so that it behaves like a span element, and they can exist all on the same line. So now this is all without any CSS. Now we will slowly add the CSS for the navigation bar. This image, we will ensure that this text shows up in the middle of this image, and only thank you for coming will show up when we hover over the image. We will ensure that the image gets darkened when we hover over it. We will also place all of this content in a black box and attach it to the bottom of the page, and they will all coexist on the same line or linearly. So let's see how the CSS looks. Okay, so the first thing I would like to do is create the navigation bar. As you can see, I don't have to give an ID or a hashtag because this is of type nav. I am able to select all of the different nav bars on the screen through one simple line, which is just nav. This will allow us to select all the navs on the screen. Or in this case, it'll only select the only nav that exists on the screen. So I don't actually have to give this navigation bar an ID. So this nav bar should have a width of 100%. And this should have a background color of blue. This is a simple way of doing it. I gave it a different background color. And a height of 50 pixels. Okay. And all the color or the text within it will be white. So now we will also include some functionality where we can space out the content on the navbar. Right now, if we saved it and ran the code, we would actually see that, just like I had shown you before, without the CSS, all the text is smushed together. So how do we allow it so that the text actually looks farther apart? I can give the display of this property or this navigation bar a flex, and then give this property called justify content and space between. So right now the question is, this doesn't make any sense. How does this actually look, right? Which is always the part which is important to understand. So I will save this file, and then I will run it, and we should actually be able to see how this looks. So So now if I refresh the page, as you can see, I have homepage, about us, and contact us. And they're now spread apart. As you can see, they're spread apart. So what does it look like when I remove any of these properties? So remember I said display flex? If I remove this property, then you will actually see all the content smushed together. If I add display flex, this will actually allow us to use justify content. So justify content is only usable if you have display of flex. So now what other types of justify contents are there? With Chrome developer tools, I can actually switch between different properties of justify content and see what's the best one for me. So as you can see, I have this and this. And I understand that space around is actually pretty nice. So I think right now I don't have space around, but I have space between right now, and it looks so much nicer. So using this tool, you can see all the different types of properties you can use. So all I have to do is go to this portion and keep moving through it, and it'll dynamically change. So now we have justify content of space around. So let's say if I change the background color or remove the blue, as you can see, you see nothing. And the reason why is because now we have the color of the text to be white. So if I remove this, you'll see the black text. They will all be spaced apart because of the space around justify content. And if I specify blue, you will now see a blue navigation bar with black text. And I can specify color of white, right? So, and this 100% width is actually not needed. So you can remove this line of code from your CSS. This is a great way of seeing what code isn't needed. And now we will move on and try and code this profile picture. So right before the profile picture, again, like I said, this width of 100% isn't needed. And I think I said justify content will now become space around. So we will include that. So after this, we will have to do something with the profile picture. So this div ID of picture, we will do some magic with it, I guess. So what can we do? Just as last time, we've said that this div has to have a background color of black. That's necessary because when we hover over the image and we change the opacity of the image, we will show the dark background color of the div or the parent div of ID picture. So again, we have the div ID of picture, and when we hover over the image, the opacity of the image will change, which will allow the picture behind it to show, and the picture or the div has a background color of black. So it'll look like it's becoming darker. So we will again include that functionality. Except the only difference this time is we have another div. This third div also shows text on hover over, but now it will actually move up. I'm sorry, it says my website. So this div will actually move up by a few pixels and will give space for this bottom div. And now let's see how this functionality should look and how this functionality will come to place. So again, let's switch back over. So again, this is the div ID picture. I hope everyone understands I'm using the same tool. As you can see, and when I hover over it, I see that this div is 100% width. This is the div ID of description. Okay. As you can see from the blue line, my website, this div is right in the middle. Then there's a bottom div, which you cannot see. Now, when I hover over this bottom div shows up and the top div moves. So it's the same functionality, except now we have additional text saying my website, and this text actually moves upwards by a few pixels. So this is the expected functionality, and this is the current functionality. The current functionality is we have my website, okay, which is text located below the picture. A thank you for coming, which is text located below the picture, and this text is actually visible without you hovering over the image. We will move this text in towards the middle of the image. Both description and text will be moved towards the middle of the image, and we will then darken the image. So this is the expected functionality. So now let's go ahead and code this. All right. So now I will introduce something new called position relative. What position relative is if you have a parent container, you have to give that parent container a position of relative, and any children containers or children divs within that parent container should be given a position of absolute. So there's two positions that we will discuss this lecture that are very important. These are the key points: relative and absolute. Parent containers get absolute. As you can see, this picture, the content, it also holds the content of this this div of ID description, and it also holds this div of ID text. So that's why this is known as a parent div. These are all known as children divs. Should be given a position of relative. So I will actually write position relative. And the parent div gets position of relative. Okay. And what does this background color of this div need? Just as we said last lecture, the background color needs to have a black color. This black color will be shown when we hover over the image and that opacity of the image changes from 1 to 0.7. We will then change the font size or the text of all the content within this div. So everything included within this div will now have font size of 20. And now we will say color of white. What color of white means is the text of the color will be white. We also have used that here in the navbar, so it's repeated, right? And we also have background color, which is repeated. And we don't have position relative here. So this is new. So the next thing we will say is height, 150 pixels. This describes the height of this div. And we can say the width of this profile picture is 150 pixels. This is the size of my image. So this should be changed to the size of your image. Lastly, I will have top of 10 pixels and left of 10 pixels. This will actually, it will move the content 10 pixels from the top of its parent container. As you can see, the parent container of picture is this entire HTML tag. So now, by including this, we will say div ID of picture be 10 pixels from the top. So now what we can do is something I actually forgot, is you must include a body tag. Okay, this body tag is necessary when writing code. So let's include a body tag. And now we can shift all of this over so you guys can see how this looks. I'm wondering if I shift. Okay. As you can see, this body tag is necessary always in HTML. So use the body tag. So now this div is located 10 pixels from the top and from the left of its parent container, which is the body tag. Okay. So we don't have any parent containers outside of picture. So we don't have a div containing this ID picture. So now if I put left 10 pixels, it will use body. So that is a natural property of position relative. So now that I've explained that, position relative hopefully should be clear. This is used for parent containers, okay? And if we want to position children containers within the parent container, we can use position of absolute. So now we will include position text of absolute. So text is the bottom. This is the div that's hidden initially. So obviously if it's hidden, then it has to have an opacity of 0. And again, this is a child container, like I said, so it has to have a position of absolute. And then we can say that this bottom is 10 pixels. So what does bottom exactly mean? Like what does it mean? So I can actually show you guys. I will save this and I'll move over to the screen and you guys should be able to see and understand this. Okay, so as you can see, I have my picture, and within this picture, let's text opacity not 0. Okay, so, and you probably cannot see it, so let's change the background color. So now you can see this, right? Previously, this was down over here. By giving it a position of absolute, say that this child container text, which is here, is a child of this div, which is ID of picture. So we are able to actually say position absolute. Position absolute will ensure that this is a child container and it is contained within the parent container. What does bottom 10 pixel do? As you can see, I can say bottom 10 pixels and I can change this to bottom 20 pixels or 50 pixels or 60 pixels, 90, 80, 90, 100, or I could say 0 pixels, right? As you can see, it's ensuring that from the bottom of the div, it is 0 pixels above. So it is just ensuring that from the bottom of the parent div, it is 20 pixels high. So this child div is 10 pixels above the bottom of the parent div. So, but now you might say, then why is it in the middle of the screen? Shouldn't it be at the bottom? But that's because this div is located in this orange line. We have not specified the width and the length of the image. So if I can now say image has a width of 150 pixels and a height of 150 pixels, now you will better understand how this works. See, now you have this text. This text is a bottom of 20 pixels. If I say a bottom of 10 pixels, bottom of 0 pixels, it comes there. I hope this makes sense. This is the child container. Text is a child container. This div ID of picture is a parent container. The div ID of text is 0 pixels currently from the bottom of the parent container, meaning it's at the bottom of it. If I change it to 20 pixels, 30, 40, you can see it moving up. So now that makes sense, right? That makes sense as to how there's position relative and how there's position of absolute and what that exactly means. Okay, so we have done some work with text, but we have not aligned the text. By giving this is something you should know. This is not something that you will immediately understand, or you should remember this, or the next time you're programming, just look at your previous code. Text align center will center the text. And because this text ID or div has a width of 100%, it will actually center the text within this 100%, exactly in the middle. Next thing we will do is, this is what we learned last lesson. Transition and WebKit transition have ID, or sorry, have 7.7 second duration change. So now we will discuss what that means. So remember, when we hover over the image, the text has to show up. Initially, the text is invisible. In order to do this, we have to specify transition. So over the course of 0.7 seconds, we will change the opacity, which we have right now, to 1 over 0.7 seconds. Now, WebKit transition means this will work on Chrome and Safari. Transition means this will work on Mozilla Firefox. It's very simple. So now the last thing located here is description. As you remember, text is below description, and description simply says my website, and it's there since the initial page load. So it's there since the beginning. So it does not have an opacity of 0, right? But we don't have to say it doesn't have an opacity of 0. The browser knows that it has an opacity of 1. only if you define it to be an opacity of 0, it will have an opacity of 0. So now we can say position of relative because this is a child container. This child exists within picture. Picture is the parent container, right? That is why this has a position of absolute. That was a mistake. Okay. And now we will say the bottom is 70 pixels, meaning from the bottom of the parent container, it will have 70 pixels. Then we will have the width of this to be 100%, meaning this specific div will take up 100% of its parent. And we'll actually play around with that to get a better idea. So font weight bold, this is something you can include. I think this might be a little confusing, so let's remove that. And text align center, again, just as the previous div, means this div content is centered. So the content within this div is centered. And now we'll have transition. So now why do we need a transition for this picture? This picture has to move up when we hover over it. So when we hover over, when we hover over this div, this description will move up by 10 pixels. So it's necessary to have that transition occur over a period of time. Otherwise, it will happen immediately, and it looks really weird otherwise. So now we have included the navbar. We have included picture. We have included text. And we have included picture again. Oh, this should be description. I'm sorry. Yes, this should be description. This is the description. Okay. Now, what's the next thing that we have to do? So within the picture div, we have an image. And when we hover over that image, we will change its background color, or we will change its opacity so that we can see the background color of the parent div, which is black. So we will specify that the width of this is 150 pixels because that is the size of my image. Please put your width size there. And this WebKit transition, all of 0.7 seconds, meaning this occurs in Chrome, Safari, and lastly, this is Mozilla Firefox. Okay, now when we hover over the image, when we hover over the div picture, it contains the image, we will change the property of this image to 0.7. The property we are changing is opacity. So we will change the opacity of the image to 0.7, which will allow us to see the black background. That's the functionality we introduced last lecture, or lesson. So then after that, we will say, if we hover over this div, we will change the value of the text, and we will actually show the text. Initially, the text was 0, but now the opacity of the text will be 1. So this should actually make some sense. Initially, the opacity of the text was 0. When you hover over this this div, we will change the property of the text, and we will show that text to be opacity of 1. Next thing we will do, we'll say, if you hover over this picture div, we will move the description up by 80 pixels. So this is the functionality where when you hover over the div, description will move up slightly. So if you remember, this my website moves up very slightly when we hover over this div. And that's the functionality that's introduced by this one line of code. It's pretty cool. And again, when we actually change the how far it is from the bottom, we actually have to tell it to transition over 0.7 seconds. If I remove these 3 lines of code, or for which browser I'm using, which is this one line of code because I'm using Chrome, it will actually occur immediately. By specifying this WebKit transition, it'll occur over the duration of 0.7 seconds. So I hope that's clear. And lastly, we have a footer. So this footer, we have to give display of flex. So let's go and look at, before we actually, let's remove this footer code, and let's go and look at what we have now for why there's extra lines of code coming out here. But yeah, let's look at some of the code we had already written and how it looks and ensure there are no mistakes. So this is our thing. As you can see, when I hover over it, this moves upwards and this text shows. So now let's in detail go and understand. So this is the description div. This is the text div, right? When I hover over it, I can actually imply that when I hover over this element, you will see the properties that get affected. As you can see, I have set that we are hovering over this div. We will see the text, thank you for coming. And now this text has moved upwards. So let's understand how that occurred. Okay. Initially, we set the description or the div with the ID of description to have position of absolute. Everyone remembers that, right? The position of absolute. So if I remove this position of relative, my website comes down all the way over here, right? The reason for this is because we're not identifying this div as the parent container. So I can put this back. Next thing you know, we have background color of black. If I hover over it, it becomes lighter. When I remove the background color black, when I put it back, you will now see it becomes darker because we have a background color. The font size is very clear. It shrinks. The color is very clear. It's just a change in the, obviously, the color of the text. The height is very clear. Top. Okay, so what is top? This picture, a div ID of picture. Okay, we gave the ID with picture a position of relative. If I give it a top of 10 pixels and I remove it, it will go to the top of the page. If I go left, if I remove left, you will get that picture to move all the way to the left. So position of relative tells that relative to go to its parent container, which is the body, and become 10 pixels from that top of the body. Right? And as you can see, the body just starts here, 10 pixels from the most near element. So you have 10 pixels from the top. Right. So as you can see, we have the functionality for this image. Let's move to this footer and how it should look. As you can see, and within it, we have elements adjacent to one another. So this element or this div is actually in the same line as this div. And this div is the same line as this div. So how is that possible? You could have asked me. Previously, we have seen that each div is 100% width. So that we have divs on the same width. How is it possible, right? That's because in the CSS, we are giving it a property which allows it to exist on the same line. So let's go back to this navbar. If I change this span tag to a div, right, and I change this to a div, and I change this to a div, you will see that what happened with now, if I change this to a div, you will now see each one occurring on their own line. And the reason for that is because divs naturally take 100% width. So the way we avoided that is we used display flex and we did justify content space between. So by doing that, we are allowing the divs to all exist on the same exact line. This is very simple. Same idea here. Okay, if I remove this justify content space between and I remove display flex, we will see all the elements, each div has its own width of 100%. And if I put it back, you will see that it works. Navigation bar. So we will actually code this now, and we will see how this works. All right, so let's code the footer. We have to give this footer a display of flex, just like we did with the navigation bar. Then we specify that each element of this footer should be separated with space between it. And look up all the different possibilities you can have for justify content. One of them is space between. It's very cool, and it allows you to put space between some of the elements. Okay, so the next thing we'll do is we'll say bottom of 0. This says that we should to have 0 space between itself and the bottom of the page, just like we had 10 pixels from the top of the page for this div, for the picture. We will say 0 pixels to the bottom of the page. So now we will say position of absolute. Right. Actually, no, this should not have a position of absolute. That wouldn't make any sense because this is not a child container. And then we will say font size of 15 pixels. So again, the color is white, font size of 15 pixels. And we'll say background color could be black. So now let's see how this looks. Okay, so as we can see, this div is actually all the way up here. Now let's add position of absolute. As you can see, it goes down all the way over there. So we did meet position of absolute. And I can actually, sometimes even when I forget or I don't understand, write code within this tool and see how it would look with position of absolute with any other property. And as you can see, it's all squished together now with one line with the 100%. It will actually move to the whole size. So this is how the current website or your website should actually look. I know there are some small mistakes that I was making. Of course, this is a learning process, and I find it pretty fun to make mistakes. So I hope you guys enjoyed this lesson. Let's actually try and change. Oh, you guys weren't seeing the code. Wait 1 second. So let's change this width to 100%. And then after changing the width to 100%, we'll say that this is the position of absolute. If I do that, then the actual content will look like this. So now, I spelled it wrong. Save it again. Okay, so I missed a semicolon. Just add that and save it, and it should work. Okay, so the link that I will be including will be on GitHub, and you guys could actually even copy and paste it onto your text editor and run it, and you guys will understand how it works better. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope you guys are actually learning something that's very useful for me. And provide me with any feedback. I'd love some. How can I improve? What can I do to better the videos? And I hope you guys liked it.